Welcome back, guys. So those of you that follow the channel, you know I've had this sawmill for, about 2.5 years now. I bought it shortly after we moved up here onto the property. I bought it so I could mill out the lumber, or mill out lumber from trees on our own property. We get a lot of beetle kill on our property, so I'm not cutting down live trees. I don't feel bad about cutting down the beetle kill and milling it out to make stuff like board and batten for my greenhouse, or the whole shop that I built, the whole pole barn that I built. Now in that 2.5 years, I've figured out fixes to this sawmill to make it function better. I didn't figure out all of them. Some of them, another Norwood Lumbermate LM29 owner got in touch with me through my videos and told me about a fix that they put on their sawmill to make it work better. So I can't take credit for all of them, but let's get into the fixes that I did to this sawmill to make it work better. So let's start with the dogging system on the sawmill. Now I know I've seen a lot of sawmills, I've seen a lot of dogging systems, and I've heard a lot of complaints from about everybody in every different sawmill brand about their dogging system just not being the best. It would come loose, it wouldn't hold them tight to start with, whatever the case may be. This sawmill is no different. What I did to fix mine is I took and put a black Sharpie mark on this bracket and the bar on both sides, because this bar from the factory comes so it just slides in and out of here. It's loose in this bracket. And it's not a problem, but with the vibration of the saw head, because it's a gas motor, the vibration of the saw head going back and forth, the vibration goes from the track to here, and down into here. By welding that together, it took a little bit of the vibration out, is what I'm guessing, because it seems to work a lot better now. Now I could have brought a welder down here and just welded it when it was connected to it, but I've got a lot of sawdust down here and I had no way of getting this sawmill up to my shop because it doesn't have wheels on it. So if you can get your sawmill to a shop, if you have the wheels on it, it's easier to just leave this bolted in. There's no guesswork on whether it's wide enough or too narrow, too wide, whatever. I had to be really careful when I made those Sharpie marks and measuring, so when I took these brackets loose, took them up to my shop and welded it, made sure they were the right distance so they still fit in the track. But it seems to work a lot better now. I don't have nearly the problems with it coming loose that I used to. This little guy right here for your cant, you still got to watch it. It doesn't seem to want to bite in as much, but it does stay a lot more often than it used to. Now since we're on with the dogging system, you've got these are your log stops. They do spin around and they'll drop all the way down for your cant, to rest your cant up against it. Now I made these right here, and I made sure I made them so that my saw blade could never hit them, even down at the lowest position. Bolted them on, and that's for the cant. That's so I can cut, you notice this distance, it's about 1.5 inches. I can cut a slab about 1.5 inches wider than what they had from the factory. Now I can't cut a thick slab that much wider because it will run into the sawmill head, the plastic shrouds. But if I have a 1.5 inch, 2 inch slab that I want to cut 2 inches wider than what they have from the factory, I can now do that. So moving on to the shroud around the blade. Now there's a lot of debate over whether a plastic shroud or a metal shroud is better. I won't get into that. I don't really care as long as it protects my blade and the sawdust gets out of there. Well, that was a problem. So from the factory, this had 4 holes right here. I think they were 1.25 inch holes. And that was all they had for the sawdust to come outside the shroud. It just wasn't enough. So I originally started out by cutting out the whole end of this and letting that whole end be open. Then I put a piece of 4-inch pipe out here with an angle down so it would just blow the sawdust right down here on the ground. And then I modified it to what I have now, which is this flap. Now I cut that flap from right down here. Cut that piece out and I zip tied it up here so it helps the sawdust kind of stay right down here on the ground. But if it packs up against a flap, it doesn't get stuck because you have this big opening down here. I no longer have to worry about sawdust getting packed up inside this shroud and then circulating around with the blade and getting soaked with water, and you just get a whole mess out of it. So cutting that little flap, cutting this opening, cutting that little flap, putting a little flap right here so it doesn't go flying 6 or 8 feet out there, it seems to work pretty good. So moving down to the track system of this sawmill. A lot of sawmills out there have this same system. They have a metal track, they have a metal wheel, whether it's covered or not, and that metal wheel has a groove in it to keep it right on the track, keep it from moving off the track. The LM29, this sawmill, has this wheel down underneath this part of the track to keep it from popping up. Well, I noticed one day that as I'm pushing on the other side of the sawmill, the saw head has got this big twist to it, and it's getting kind of hard to push. This wheel was binding up against this track here, and I hadn't made an adjustment to it. So I figured that that groove in the tire was getting packed full of sawdust. And this tire in particular, out of all four, this tire was the only one it was happening to. I'm guessing it's because the sawdust coming off up here, the track being exposed, sawdust and wire was packing up here and getting packed into that tire. What I did to fix this is I drilled a hole right above the tire. I don't know if that's almost a 1/4 inch hole, directly above the tire, directly above the groove in that tire. Take a wood screw, clip it off to the right length so it stays in there, drop it right down in there. It sits in the groove of that tire, and the threads of that screw will keep that tire clean. I haven't had a problem since. And as you move the head back and forth, that screw kind of flops back and forth. So you know there's not a lot of tension on that screw against the tire. It's not going to wear the tire out. The watering system, the blade lubrication system on this machine, works great. It's just got one minor flaw. It comes with this little guy, on-off switch, that plugs into this via rubber grommet. Okay, so you got a rubber grommet you put in the tank, then you push this little guy up in the tank. And that's what you use to turn on and off. Well, you can see it's a little stiff. It's not super stiff, but it's not real easy to turn. Now that rubber grommet is the flaw. Now rubber grommets over time, well, they fall apart, especially when they're out in the sun, out in the weather. They break down and they start to split and crack. But this one also had another problem. See, as you're torquing on that on-off valve, that little flag there, it's torquing this against the rubber against the tank, and it causes a little split. That little split right there. Now I saw it start to drip, so I started thinking about how I was going to fix it. I knew that I could buy this rubber grommet and put it back in there, but a couple years down the road I'd be doing the same thing. I don't like to do that. I like to fix things once and keep moving. So I went down to the home store and I bought this basic fitting right here. Now this is a 3/8 to 3/8. This is a 3/8 hose to a 1/4 inch MIP fitting, I believe. Don't quote me on that, I'm not a plumber. You drill this hole out just a little bit bigger and you force that thing up in there and you screw it in there real tight so it doesn't leak. You come down here to a 3/8 to 3/8 on-off valve with the same barbed end fittings. This is the stock hose for this system. Slide it on there, slide it on these, put a couple clamps, and you got your on-off valve right there. It's real easy to operate. It's not torquing on the bottle at all. Nothing's gonna fail. You don't have to worry about it. One major problem I was having with this sawmill was blade dive. Anytime I would push on the saw head with just a little bit of force, that blade would want to dive into the log, and then it would dive down to a point, and then it would come back up and dive down and come up, and it made this big wave on top of the log. I couldn't figure it out. I thought it was maybe needing to run some other type of lubrication through the watering tank. Maybe it was a frozen log. I thought about everything. Still had the problem all the time. Anytime I'd push on the saw head with any amount of force, other than just barely pushing it through a log. Finally, I had a guy contact me, another LM29 owner. He said that his saw head was not level from the factory to the saw track. If your saw head isn't level to your track, that means your blade isn't level to the track, in most cases. There's no adjustment on the LM29 to adjust for pitch. So you have to do it with shims. Basically putting shims between the orange metal of the saw head and these big black grommets. Now I made a whole video on this. I'll link up here in the corner. If you're having a problem with your LM29 diving, check out that video. It explains the fix, how I did it, how to check for it, everything. So this next fix is a fix for the Kohler motor. Kohler 14 horsepower motor that I had on this machine from the factory. Now it's a big pet peeve of mine. If I'm going to let a motor sit for a couple months, say I'm not going to run it for a couple months, I like to turn the fuel off and let it run out of fuel. just let the motor keep running until the fuel's out of the carburetor and it's dried out. That way, fuel isn't sitting in your carburetor going bad for 2, 3, 4 months, however long it's going to be before you fire that thing up again. So you're going to let it set for the winter. So I like to turn the fuel off, let the motor run out of gas. Well, with this motor, and a lot of motors out there now, when you turn the fuel off, it kills the motor right then and there. So I didn't like that aspect of the machine when I first got it, but it didn't bother me enough to fix it. Until this little strap right here, your pull cord, one spring, I think it was last spring, I pulled on this thing and it kicked back on me, pulled it right out of my hands. Slapped over here and broke the tab off for the engine fuel / shutoff valve. Well, as soon as it broke this tab off, the kill switch in there was activated, so it would no longer start. So you reach up in here, you pull one of the wires off the kill switch, it opens the circuit and lets the motor run, and then you have to use your emergency shutoff switch over here on the other side to kill the motor every time. But now I couldn't turn my fuel off no matter what. So after thinking about it for a while, I got a piece of number 4 copper, I put some threads on the end of it, and I drilled out that little piece of plastic, the other half of this, with a slightly smaller hole than the threads. I took a pair of pliers and I screwed that in there nice and gentle-like, but far enough so it would stick. Now I can turn the fuel off, and my kill switch is right here. Simple little aftermarket kill switch. Hook the wires up inside, got a kill switch, and I've got my fuel on off right there. Now I'm happy because I can reach up here, turn the fuel off, leave the kill switch on, the motor sits and runs for, I don't know, maybe a minute or two until it runs out of gas. You don't have to worry about the gas going bad inside the carburetor, plugging all your carburetor up and causing you more fits next spring when you go to use it again. If you haven't already, hit that like button for me to help this video get out there. If you have a question about this sawmill or another sawmill that I might be able to answer, put it down in the comment section. I try to reply to every comment in my comment section. If you want to see a bunch of stuff get built, hit that subscribe button and the little bell for notifications. I've got so many projects that I want to build, it'd take me 3 lifetimes to do it all. Until next time, guys, go make something.